We've all felt trapped at some point in our lives, but the reality is you're never as stuck as you think you are. Today, we're going to be exploring how to get your mojo back. That's coming up next.
Hi, and welcome to the Living Richly podcast. Have you ever felt stuck? Have you ever felt like you're absolutely in a rut, like you've plateaued, or you're just not sure how you're going to get out of it? Want to welcome you to the Living Richly podcast. So great to have you join us. We're going to be talking about this today. We're going to be unpacking the idea of what does it mean to be stuck? How do you get out of that stuckness and begin to move forward again in life? It is sometimes one of the most subtle things that can happen. All of a sudden, you're moving along and it might be weeks, months, years, and all of a sudden you wake up one day and you're just like, ugh.
Yeah. It's
Ever
like,
felt that way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think feeling stuck, feeling trapped is part of the human experience. I think we all experience that during seasons of our lives, and there are what I call short-term moments of stuckness, and then there are longer seasons where we just feel like we're not moving. We feel like we're not, our life doesn't have a purpose. We're not fired up about anything. We're not motivated. I mean, I've been talking to so many people on the on this side of the pandemic, right? Now that it's over and it's behind us, there's a lot of folks that through that period of time came to realize that there's just a lot of blah. There's just a lot of gray in their lives, and they're not clear about where they want to go, what they want to do. They lack motivation. They lack energy, and it's just, again, we've talked about this before, but part of feeling stuck is often like it's like Groundhog Day. You're just kind of repeating the same day over and over again, but you don't feel like you're really living.
What we're talking about today, I think what we're going to be looking at more is that long term, where it's really become something that is, and that has really kind of captivated people. And the pandemic is a great example. We went through this, and all of a sudden, as we're coming out on the other end, like you, I've had so many conversations with people who they're kind of looking, going, I don't want to go back to what life was like then. I don't want to go back to just that. I certainly don't want to go through what I went through during the pandemic, but I'm not sure I want to just go back and rinse and repeat the life that was there in 2018, 2019 either.
Yeah. It's a stuckness is often another word for it is like lostness.
Yeah.
You just feel lost. It's not that you're in terrible danger. It's not that you're necessarily in a horrible situation, but there's just no joy there. There's just very little fulfillment in what you're doing. I was talking to one leader recently who is very successful in her career and has been for years, but since COVID, she describes it like the stuff that used to give me energy doesn't give me energy anymore. I'm having to drag my ass to do the simplest things in my business, even right. I've just lost that mojo, lost that momentum. So lostness, lack of direction is.
I think those
sign.
are great words. Depression.
Yeah.
We start to and sometimes it's easy to. Listen, depression is real. Obviously a lot of people battle that, and they need the support in order to come through that. But we even sometimes misidentify stuckness with maybe I'm depressed, maybe I'm whatever that is, and when we finally identify, no, I'm just stuck.
Yeah.
Then you can start to make that shift away from that. Maybe talked about a time you've been there. I mean, we've both been there. I know we have some of our stuff is similar, but maybe tell a little bit of a personal story of stuckness.
Well, when I was thinking about this subject for this particular episode, I was thinking back on periods of my life where I felt the most stuck. And one of them that certainly stands out for me was, it goes back to, I was still in the church world at the time, had been very unhappy in that life for a long time, I felt stuck in this role, trapped in this role. I didn't believe many of the things that I was saying from the front of the room, but felt a need to support my family. And, I had never gone to the only degree that I have, right, is a Bible college degree, which isn't terribly transferable to many other jobs or professions.
Doesn't appeal to a lot.
Doesn't appeal to a lot of folks on a resume, you know. And I remember those last 2.5 years before I left, and it took the death of my dad and that recognition that we never know how long we've got. Dad died, he was only 66 years old. He was healthy for most of his life. And then 2 years before he passed, he's diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer, never smoked a day in his life. And I remember that whole period of time was so hard. And then he passed. And I remember as part of that grieving process, not long after the funeral, actually, I came to recognize I can't keep doing this. Like, I can't keep staying in a job, staying in a role that I don't believe in anymore, that doesn't make me happy. It's actually become toxic and unhealthy for me. It's not good for my family. But I remember just feeling so trapped. Like, I couldn't, where would I go? Who would hire me? I think when you, for me, it was like, you just couldn't believe that there were any other options. This is my lot. This is all that's available to me, and I guess I have to just try to make the best of it. And I think a lot of our listeners can relate to that feeling.
Yeah, and for me, absolutely, I think they can relate. And for me, certainly the situation was similar to yours, and that was when I was leaving the church world. It was interesting. For me, that was a 5-year journey period.
Wow.
It was in 2008. I took a sabbatical. I had just finished. I'd been pastoring, of course, the Bikers Church, but I had also taken over pastoring the church that you had been leading for a season.
He tried to clean up my messes.
No. But they had hired somebody now to full-time to take over City Church, and I went on a sabbatical, and I took a couple of months off, and part of that was I went on a road trip, and that was back in 2008, and I remember on that road trip thinking so many different times, I'm done, I'm burnt out, I don't believe this anymore, I don't know what to, but I had no solution to how I would get out of that.
Right.
And so I came home all ready to be, I was done, I was over with and everything like that. And then some things happened. I then all of a sudden the guy that had taken over the church, that didn't work out. He left. So what I did is I doubled down on what was keeping me unhappy. And I thought, okay, well, if pastoring Bikers Church isn't
let me pastor two churches.
And
but isn't that funny? That's what we do. Like,
right,
often when we're stuck, rather than try new things or look, because there's always a way forward. And I know back then, if somebody would have told me that, I probably would have told them to fuck off, because I wouldn't have believed them.
Well, you wouldn't have said that. But
well, I would have internally. I wouldn't have said
fudge off. Frig off.
I would have never said fudge off. Not in a lifetime. I would have never said that. But I think I would have been very upset and very resistant to that, because I would have been like, well, I don't see it, and so when we can't see a way forward, to your point, what we're doing is already not working, but because we're almost like blind to any other solution, that we've accepted that this is all that's available to us, we will then double down on the things that are already making us unhappy. And I remember someone saying, using Einstein's definition of insanity, which is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result every time. Well, if I double down on the things that already aren't working, then all I'm going to get is what I don't want twice as fast.
Double the results.
Double the results of
what
I don't want. Double the negative.
And so for me, because I was in this place, and I'm now doubling down on, and it distracted me for a season,
right?
But it was the busyness that distracted me. The emptiness was still there, and so then I would do the typical things that I would do in my past that would cause kind of harm and self-destruction and all of that kind of stuff. Because again,
our listeners want to know.
I had no way forward, right? I had no way out of it,
right.
And until it finally came to a head, and the rest is history. But I remember when I finally left the church world, and we've shared this story, right? Of course, had built a relationship with you over the years. You had done some other stuff, but then had recently, about a month or about a year before I resigned, you had just started into coaching, started your own company, Breakthrough Coach, and I remember sitting down, reaching out to you, and I literally was in a place of panic, and I was hoping that that there'd be some goodwill towards me because I had pastored your church. There would be some goodwill that you could at least introduce me.
Who wanted to step into those shoes? I tell you.
But you could introduce me to one of the business owners you were coaching or somebody in your network who might hire me just as whatever, a Joe laborer, because I thought I have nothing to offer, no skills, how do I do anything? And then of course you asked the famous question that you like to ask, have you ever considered coaching? And the initial answer was, no, of course I have never considered.
I couldn't even imagine
what are you talking about? And I remember even saying to you, my response was, what the hell would I know about business coaching? And you made the connection to everything I'd been doing, all the leadership training, all the work that
the fact that you'd led organizations,
but until I had somebody else point out to me, and that was you, point out to me all of the things that I had been doing, but from a different perspective than the one I had.
Right. Because we get stuck. Like we talk about stuck. Stuck is actually primarily a mindset. It's a belief that we are limited in our options, or that we have no other options than what's in front of us. And you talk about that experience where I asked you that question and helped you connect those dots. Well, I was merely paying forward an experience that I had before I left the church. And part of the reason I left the church is someone that I knew sat down with me, and I shared with them how frustrated I was and on how unhappy I was. And they said, well, why don't you make a change? And that's where all that negative thinking just came all out, where I said, well, there is no alternative for me. Who would hire some kid who never went to college? At that point, I was no longer a kid at that point, but who would hire this guy that's been in the ministry, only has a Bible college degree, doesn't have any marketable skills? And they were the ones that said to me, same as what I said to you, well, you've started and led organizations, you've built a successful organization, you have all these skills on crafting vision and create, and all of a sudden,
teams, all of it. Yeah.
All of a sudden, the bias that I had, or the lens that I was looking at the world through, began to change, and I realized I have options. And for anyone listening to this episode today, we said it at the teaser: you are never as stuck as you think you are. Stuckness is an illusion, and the feelings associated with it, not an illusion. They're very real, right? But it's actually false. I was recently had the opportunity to share the Living Richly message, the first time ever in a public forum outside the podcast, obviously, but at a conference that I was invited to speak at, and with a bunch of business leaders. And it's the first time I brought the Living Richly lens into that environment, and it was so well received and resonated with so many people. The feedback was, we need more time with you next year. Can we make sure that when we get you back, we can have you for more than just one session? We want you back. But it was interesting, as I was raising the issue of living your best life and defining the kind of life you want and going after it, there was a young lady in the room that raised her hand and said, yeah, but that's probably true for everybody else here, but it's not possible in my situation. And my heart went out to her, because I gently tried to give her a different perspective and tried to get her to look at it from a different lens. But what I recognized was the place I was in so long ago, where the belief that there are no options, there is no way forward, this is my lot, and I just have to make the best of it, even if it means being miserable. I'm just going to be unhappy the rest of my life. That is a false notion. It's a lie. It's a mirage and an illusion.
And I think this is one of those places, or these times, where that old cliche saying, we don't know what we don't know,
right,
is so true when it comes to this, is because we are so blind to what we see and think is reality. We don't know that there are all these other options, and probably we talk about it all the time. That's one of the themes here with the Living Richly movement, and that is this idea of the importance of community, the importance of those trusted allies, those trusted people in your life, because they can bring that perspective that you don't have yourself. We'll talk for a few minutes, just because I want to hone in on this before we get into how we do. What are some of the things we feel when we're in those moments? I know for me, when I was in those moments of stuckness, and there's been a few of them. The one that I just shared is probably the most obvious one to me, but there have certainly been some other seasons where I've been that an absolute feeling of hopelessness for me, a sense of my own self-worth is at the all-time low when I'm feeling stuck.
So when you say that, what are the actual, when you, because I can resonate with that 100%. Like your self-esteem takes a real beating. But what were the thoughts for you? What are you actually thinking?
There are scripts, absolutely, and there are scripts that I had to work through at some points. Part of my living richly, my own journey, I've had to work through them. But certainly the sense of I have nothing to offer, that I'm a failure, I'm a one-trick pony, right? So I have
dance,
no
monkey,
right
dance
monkey. It's all I can do, and this is the only way. And then I would be, if only back when I was 16, if I had chosen a different path. And maybe I had now I'm reaping what I sowed, all of those, some of the things. What about for you?
Oh, I mean, I'd say yes to every single one of those. And I think then for me, it was like, this is all evidence that I'm fucked up. Yeah. That I talked about the script that for so long, that I am fatally flawed, that I am deeply different from everyone else, but not in a positive way, that I'm different in that grace and compassion and all those things, and forgiveness and new starts, that's available to everyone but me. I'd become convinced because I was so stuck. I could, nobody who's got even an ounce of ability to succeed would find themselves where I am right now. So I must be a complete screw up. Right.
And for those who know us well, I'm going to talk directly with you, but for those that know you well, who see you as this successful business owner who's owned a couple of very successful business companies, who has been incredibly influential in so many lives, so many business owners, incredibly successful people who lean on you for the guidance. I think some of them, if they were listening to this right now, would be absolutely shocked that they're looking, going, someday I wish I could be like Eric, and yet Eric is saying, I was absolutely lost and had, complete, not feeling any confidence in any ability. I had nothing. I had no ability that I could bring to people. And they're looking, going, oh my God, the amount of different ways you've influenced my life. How could you believe that about yourself?
Well, it's imposter syndrome at its best. I mean, it's like, if people only knew, I think Jason said it a couple of shows back, helping others on the outside while like hating myself on the inside. I think that it's so easy when we see people in any kind of public role or leadership role to put them on a pedestal and think that they've got all their shit together, when in reality a lot of leaders are hurting. I think of, and we keep coming back to this, but I think of to our male listeners, so many men suffer in silence. They have no one to talk to about their private pain, and they carry this incredible weight on their backs. I think women are better at this. They talk more openly amongst themselves. They talk about their feelings more. They talk about their struggles more. And I'm not trying to make that a generalization, but I think generally it is true. Yeah. And certainly the research and the studies would prove it. The numbers prove it. The rate of suicide among men is so much higher. And I have to say, there was, during that 2.5 years and leading up to it, there were times where I was suicidal. There were times where I was like, the best thing I could do for my family and for everyone else involved. I was so stuck. I'd come to so believe that I can't find my way forward. And yet there was also part of me says, I can't stay in this place. I'm suffering. I'm unhappy. I'm making my unhappiness is bleeding out on my kids. I love what Jason said, right? If you don't deal with your shit, then you're going to end up bleeding on the people who didn't cut you, right? And I felt like I was doing that. So I had this sense of the best thing for everyone. Rob, I became firmly convinced that everybody in my life would be better off without me. That's how dark it got for me. And it was someone like what I did for you, paying it forward, just showing me a different way or helping me see things from a different perspective. And what's come out of that now is this sense of, even at moments where I feel stuck right in my life at any point, is that I'm actually not stuck. There's some resistance here. There are some things that are slowing me down, perhaps, or perhaps I've strayed and need to find my center again. But this deep belief now that we're never as stuck as we think we are is something that has just transformed my life.
And just to reiterate this, and I at the risk of kind of overstating this point, I remember when I first stepped in as the interim pastor of the church just after you had resigned, and of course you had a staff that were there, and I'm having conversations, and I spent a lot of time with your staff and working with them. And that was one of the observations they made, was that after your dad's passing, and which would have been right in that season where you're like trying to figure all this out, that they talked about how isolated you had become and how you had distanced yourself from the staff, and you were disengaged, and all of that was because of this turmoil that you now can identify and acknowledge. And so I share to say, I remember, and we knew each other. We weren't the friends we are today at that point. We had a mutual respect for each other, but I remember hearing those and my heart breaking for you at that point, but also a little bit of a tinge of
and yet I'm feeling the same thing.
Now I wasn't at the same level at that moment. It was within a couple of years. I kind of followed behind you by a couple of years, but I mean, hearing that and seeing that, and so we sometimes think that we're suffering in silence when we're in these ruts, and yet to the point, it is what you're feeling is probably bleeding into the people around you. They're sensing it. They just don't know how to, especially if you come across as a strong person normally. They don't know how to connect. They don't know how to respond. They don't know how to reach out. And there may be people right now around you. Those of you listening or watching, there may be people around you right now who are wanting to throw you a lifeline. They just don't know how to do it. They don't know what the best way is to respond. And part of it is, one of the first steps sometimes to getting unstuck is that asking for help, and to put your hand up and say, I'm in need here. And sometimes those people are ready to respond. They just don't know how.
And isolation is one of the clearest signs of stuckness. You start to pull away. Some other signs that you're perhaps stuck is a chronic sort of frustration or dissatisfaction. Mine was anger. I remember I was part of a leadership development program, went away. This was at the end of it now, over 2 years, and we were at our last sort of offsite. We would go twice a year, so a total of 4 times over the 2-year period, to a beautiful retreat center at Keats Island on just off the in Horseshoe Bay in Vancouver's gorgeous location. And I'd gone into that leadership development mentoring program. It's my first real experience with mentoring, as I was 30 years old at the time. So that's like, dinosaur ages away now, but I was only 30, and I'd gone into such hope, because even at the age of 30, I'd been sensing, like we've talked about this, like this had plagued me for a long time. These feelings, these beliefs, and we're coming to the end of it now. I'm at the last offsite, and my chronic dissatisfaction is now rage, because I'm like, fuck, not even this worked, right? And I had such high hopes of seeing change, and I hadn't seen it. But what was holding me back was, I was blaming the circumstances, I was blaming the issues, then I was blaming myself pretty heavily, but really believing that the reason all of this was happening, the reason I wasn't finding my way forward was because I was fatally flawed. But it wasn't me that was fatally flawed, but I had some thinking that was deeply flawed. I had some beliefs that were deeply flawed, and I was literally, I think stuckness in a lot of ways, we are creating it.
Yeah.
We are creating our own sense of lostness because we're the thinking and the creative power of the mind that could be used to craft the better way forward is being used to create the very prison that we live in every day.
Absolutely, to create that whole, again, you talk about some of those symptoms of being the isolation, the anger. For me, it was the lack of motivation. I started to mail it in. And I remember how difficult it was.
Mail it in. That's even slower than phoning it in, isn't it?
It really is, yeah.
Especially with Canada Post.
Yeah, I started to snail mail it in, phone it in, mail it in. What is the phrase?
It's phoning it in, but I like mailing it in. I'm like, Jesus, that would take forever to get there.
I always thought it was mail it in. See, I just learned something. I would mail it in. I think that's perfect.
We're getting a big thumbs up from Steve. He likes that one. Hey, Steve's here, by the way.
Hi. I found myself, and it was, of course, in the church world, you're having to prepare a sermon every week. Now, I envied some of the denominations that had a liturgy. You just going, what's this week's sermon?
Dude, I was going back to sermons from 2 years ago and just recycling them because I didn't have the energy.
I was stealing other people's sermons. I would watch somebody on TV, or I'd watch, at that point, of course, the internet is
nobody
around.
Listening has ever done that before, right?
I can imagine ministers today, they're probably getting their sermons from ChatGPT.
ChatGPT has just become the best preacher ever.
Right?
Like the most.
Act like an evangelical preacher and give me a 3-point sermon on. Make sure there's an offering.
Yeah. Help me take a better offering.
I would preach these messages, and then I'd head home afterwards and I would fall into the couch, put on TV, completely go numb, mindless, just anything not to be. I was just such a place of despair. But that just, and everything, I avoided so many things during the course of the week. I would avoid doing all kinds of tasks, reaching out to people. I didn't want to do anything. I was just zero motivation.
Yeah, and for me, physical exhaustion. The stress was literally feeling overwhelmed. I mean, there's so many. I talk about burnout, having gone through it 3 times. The like my situations, my belief about being stuck was a big part of that. Was probably like the leverage piece that was causing these feelings. And what was interesting is that when I started to make some changes, I remember when I did leave the church world, that was a big decision. And for a little while, being in a new context, I felt better. I was in a new environment, but all that was an environmental cure, or a geographical cure, I should say. I'm in a different environment now. I'm in a different geography, so to speak. But my internal world, my thinking, my beliefs, none of that has changed. So it didn't take long, even in a new environment. I just carried that shit with me. It just followed me into my new context, and those same feelings began to show up. And it would take my third burnout for me to finally get present to this stuff I'd been trying to get present to, and taking some steps and then reverting back to numbing and avoiding and distracting myself, where I finally began to shift the thinking. And what was really interesting is a song that was really meaningful to me when Jim first introduced it to me in 2011, when I first started to do this work. I was still I was just leaving. I left the church world at this point, and I was still finding myself very in a really bad place. And he introduced me to Mumford & Sons' Little Lion Man.
Okay.
And it's a song all about it's a pretty, we'll put it in the show notes. It's a powerful song. Well, I had the opportunity to listen to them last night. They were here at Blues Fest. And of course I get when this episode drops, it won't be last night, but anyway, recently, right. It's the first time I've heard them live 3 times. They're one of my favorite bands. And I had several emotional moments during that concert last night, because the first time that I'm listening to their music, which was often a cry of my heart, I want to be in a better place, to finally be on the other side of it and go how far I've come. And I'm so grateful for the journey. And we're going to talk about some of the things you can do to get unstuck. I think we want to go there really quickly here. But what I want every listener to hear, if you're listening to this show and you're saying, that's me, I'm stuck, I'm lost, I don't have direction, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I lack the motivation, that doesn't have to stay that way. There is a way forward. We're going to talk about some of the ways to do that.
And thank you for sharing. What a great story to share. I mean, I've known for years that Mumford & Sons is one of your favorite bands, and I've always kind of went, why? Like, I mean, they're good, but
come on, they're more than good. They're amazing.
But hearing you share that story, it's like, wow. Like, that's the first time I've ever heard you share that about that song. And it's like, damn, okay, now I get more excited. I'm like, I want to go listen to some more Mumford & Sons.
Well, the words, the refrain of that song, Little Lion Man, right, is, it was not your fault but mine, but it was your heart on the line. I really fucked it up this time. didn't I, my dear? And it reflected the grief and the over mistakes made with my kids, mistakes made in past marriages, mistakes made in past friendships. But to hear it last night, because whenever I would hear it, it would always make me sad, longing for a better place. But to hear it last night live, performed on this side of my story, I kept telling Kate, I got bugs flying into my eyes, or dust, I think, flying into my eyes. Right. I was having some serious
Well, you've got some dust and bugs flying in your eyes right now. I can feel, I hear it in your voice and the emotion that comes out of that. That's beautiful. I, again, appreciate so much that vulnerability, and that's what this is all about. So yeah, let's talk about some of the things that people can do, some of the strategies for getting unstuck. And maybe I'll start one of the first, because I go to this so oftentimes, and I want to share a bit of a story around it. But one of the first things you can do to get unstuck is to reconnect or connect for the first time to your values. What matters to you? What matters most to you? If you haven't taken the time to do the exercise of figuring out what matters most to you, let me encourage you to make that one of the first things that you do once you're done listening to this episode, is to take some time to do that. One of the most freeing things for me, and this was something that happened right after I left the church world and I began to do my studying for business coaching and getting my certification for business coaching. One of the first things that I did is I developed a personal purpose statement. In fact, I think it was an exercise that I had to do with you as you were kind of helping me with the training stuff. And it was an exercise that we did together, was create that personal purpose statement. And it's something that I've tweaked and I continue to play with, and it's a living document for me. But it was something that I way back ever before I ever heard of the term living richly, or we began this journey. But it was one of the first things that got me into motion again, was defining what mattered to me and how I was going to express that.
Yeah. Anytime I feel any lostness now, anytime I experience any sense of I'm lacking motivation, or I'm feeling like the fires of purpose and passion are beginning to die down, I just begin to lean into my values and say, what does courage look like in this situation? What does compassion, what does connection, curiosity look like? And I always find in those values, I find something to help me get moving again. Tied very closely to that is creating a vision of what you want, right? Like, imagine yourself, if you're listening to the show today and you're stuck, if you were unstuck, what would that look like? If you got unstuck, where would you be? What would you be doing? What would you be spending more time investing in? Getting clear on that. And one of the ways we help people do that in the quadrant model is by using the classic 4 elements, right? We come back to this on a regular basis. Because I think it's just a powerful model. When you're saying, I don't know what my life would look like if it wasn't this is all I can see. Well, what if you were to imagine, if we think of the water element, which is the mind, what would my mind at its best look like? Think of what it is now, and think of what you'd like it to be. What would your thought life be like? What would be the self-talk? What would be the learning you would want to be taking in, right, to sharpen your thinking? If your heart, what would your heart look like at its best? Your emotional life, your relationships, your passion, your spirit, right? Like, what would spirituality look like for you? What would your spirit and connecting to something bigger than yourself look like? And finally, what would the earth element, which is your body, physically, your nutrition, your sleep, your exercise, all that, begin to craft a vision of a better future and use that, because once we see that, how do I put it? We get so stuck in seeing our current reality, we can't picture a preferred future. Start dreaming again. Yeah. Start thinking about what you want and let that naturally pull you forward.
As soon as you talk about that notion of crafting that vision or beginning to look at that preferred future, it immediately reminded me of Gleicher's formula for change.
That's so good. Love that.
Gleicher's formula for change. It talks about the fact that you need certain elements all have to be present if you are going to overcome the resistance to change. You need to be dissatisfied with your current reality. You need to have, again, what you just talked about, you need to have a vision of a preferred reality, and then you need to be able to define the first concrete steps towards achieving that.
Right.
And if all 3 of those elements are there, it's enough power to overcome the resistance to change, and I think it's absolutely critical. So if you're in a place of stuck, you're dissatisfied, recognize it, call it out. I'm not happy with where I am.
Yeah.
Then begin to define that preferred future. And then what are the first steps? What are the first little things I can do to take me towards that? And you will overcome that resistance to change.
Listen, frustration can be fuel. Dissatisfaction can be what catapults you forward into a new life. It's been said that until you get sick and tired of being sick and tired, you probably will not have the motivation to pay the price to change your situation. But if you're currently listening to this episode right now and you're in that place and you've been suffering and you've been dissatisfied and you've been frustrated, what I want to say to you is don't waste that energy. That energy can either propel you, keep dragging you down, or it can propel you forward. And I would also say this, don't let all the suffering you've already experienced go to waste, right? You can use it to help you craft a new life. So dissatisfaction, you get to work your way through that and create a new life for yourself.
Oh, so true. And, along the lines of with your energy, where your energy goes when it comes to your emotions, when it comes to your dissatisfaction, I want to say, certainly think another kind of step on this is to watch or monitor the self-talk. The amount of time and the amount of energy we put into saying the wrong things to ourselves, the tear downs, there's an old phrase, and I refer to this oftentimes, right? Words of life, words of death. And we often spend time, words of death tear down. Shame tears down. Every time we say something that brings us down, that negative self-talk, that's what it all of a sudden removes it. It just takes away all your power and your authority to be able to move forward. Watch our thoughts, our words matter so much.
Huge.
Shift the language we use. You use the reference there, the get to. Shift the language from have to get to. Change the language from should. Stop shoulding all over yourself. Use language like training. I'm training myself to do better. I would like to do better. All of that. When we shift the language, there is power in the words that we use.
Well, listen, we talk to ourselves all the time. Why not make it positive? If you're getting up out of bed every day, looking at yourself in the mirror like I used to and say, you piece of shit, you're worthless. You're a failure. You're no good. People would be better off without you. Your kids would be better off without you. That is not going to serve you well. You're only going to dig a deeper hole. Your inner critic, you may think it's serving you well. All it's doing is beating the shit out of you. And the best day of my life was when I gave my inner critic his walking papers and said, that's it, buddy. You're fired. Now, he keeps trying to show up to work every day because he thinks he still has a job. And I have to remind him regularly. And sometimes I start taking his counsel again, but I quickly dismiss him now a lot quicker than I used to. But your self-talk, man, that is everything. What you think, your thoughts, your words. So think about your words. Your words both reflect your beliefs and reinforce them. So when I say I'm a piece of shit, I'm revealing what that I believe that. But by saying it out loud, I mean, sometimes the self-talk is just internal, but there are times the words come right out. Yep. When you say them out loud, you are reinforcing that negative belief. So what if you started reinforcing some positive beliefs? And if you're in a really dark place, you may need some people around you to help you believe. It was a guy by the name of Jim Harrington who first looked me straight in the eye and said, Eric, you're a good man. And I said, Jim, I don't believe you. You've heard this story before. Eric, you're a good man. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. And he finally looked at me and said, it's okay, Eric. I know you're not ready for this, but I'm going to keep reminding you until you can hold that belief for yourself. And he did, and I have. Right?
It's so incredible. And David Goggins, who is many people will be familiar, intense guy for sure, who went from being this 300-pound, overweight, completely unmotivated, just everything about his story, incredible story. His book Can't Hurt Me is a powerful, powerful story, and he transformed that into being this guy that ran ultra marathons and is just one of the most incredibly fit human beings, and psychologist, talks so much about motivation, and he describes in his book the way that he would talk to himself and the way that he would, the conversations he would have with himself. He even named his inner critic, and he shifted so that he could then identify. And it was when David, he had David and he had Goggins, right? He had his name, and when David was speaking to him, the caring, kind, loving, supportive, encouraging person, and then Goggins, who was the guy that was tearing him down and calling him the piece of shit.
That's just Goggins talking.
Right? Yeah. Well, but by doing that, he could separate and identify the voice a lot more easily. So however it works for you, I think it's important to do that. Let me shift into another one that I was a real one for me. I talk about, being that major, a smaller rut that I was stuck in happened, early into my business coach days. And that was, I was struggling with just my success and kind of getting this thing moving. And one of the things that I was doing is I was comparing myself to you.
Right.
And I was comparing myself to some others, but you in particular, and your ease at how you were doing things, everything like that. And I was
funny how you call it ease, because that was some tough slugging for me.
Of course it was, of course. But it's perception, right? And that's the mistake, that when we compare ourselves to others, we look at others and go, look how good they've got it, look how easy they do it, look how natural it is. We have no clue about all the struggles and the insecurity.
Everybody has their private pain, man.
Well, and to the point, as we had already gotten to become friends at that point, but even then, as I was comparing, rather than just being so comfortable in me being me, and I remember and it was Sherry that helped me figure that out, is when I started to say, no, well, I don't need to be Eric as a business coach. I need to be Rob as a business coach, and Rob has a lot of value to bring us. And as I shifted in that's when things really began to take off.
Yeah.
And it began to get well. And of course, I didn't burn out like other people did.
Yeah, following my path might not have been very wise. I would add to that, I think, avoiding comparing yourself is so important, because it's not about other people. It's about what's important to you. What are you pursuing? That's the measuring line. That's the only measuring line. Are you being true you? A couple of other quick ones is take action.
Yeah.
As you begin to get clear on what you want and what your life being unstuck might look like start taking action. Put yourself in situations that will challenge you and call forth some of that energy that you had at one point, right? If you're just doing the same old every day, you're not requiring anything new of your heart, your mind, your spirit, your body. It's not being challenged. And so change by its very nature, although we resist it, is a powerful catalyst to transformation. So what's one thing you can change? What's one new thing you can try? What's one challenge you can take on? Because I think you can also get caught and trapped in the paralysis of analysis around this thing. You don't need to be, rethinking your life, re-engineering and revisioneering your life, not a simple, easy exercise. It takes work, but oftentimes it's little by little, slowly by slowly, one little change at a time, you begin to gain your momentum again.
I'm smiling because I'm thinking of, I used to do this whole kind of shtick around the same old disease, and I won't do it today just for the sake of time, but I go through this whole thing about, you wake up at the same old time, you go, drive the same old way to the same, old job, and you kiss the same old wife, all of the things. There's a whole
Careful
long,
on that one.
Yeah, there's a whole long.
Are you supposed to kiss the neighbor's wife?
No. People laugh, and it's this whole thing about the same old disease.
Right.
But what got I thinking as you were talking there about, just change. What's one thing? This is going to sound so silly for some, and yet it may be just that starting point. If you're feeling so if you're commute to work, just take a different route.
Right.
Something as silly or it seems so insignificant as just take a different route to work tomorrow.
Yeah.
That little change might be enough to make you all of a sudden you're seeing things that you haven't seen for a bit, and then make one other little change. It doesn't have to be this monumental and go back to Gleicher's formula, right? It's just what are a couple of small things, that first steps that I can take towards that preferred vision that will get me there, and that's what keeps you overcoming resistance to change. We're almost out of time.
I love it. Yeah, I would say the last one for me. I mean, there's so much we could talk about, but I think landing here for me is probably the best place to land, because it was the hardest thing for me to do, which was be kind to yourself. Offer yourself compassion during this process. Stop condemning yourself. Stop heaping judgment and criticism on yourself, because you're only going to make it worse. That fuel is toxic. It's going to destroy you. It's going to sap any positive energy you have right out of you. Be kind, be compassionate. Even if all you do is learn to practice some self-care, a little bit of self-care. I call it radical self-care, but maybe you don't start at radical. Just start doing a few things for yourself that make you feel better, that fill your cup. Start building up that energy, that then you can begin to ask these bigger questions and these other things that we've talked about. But be kind to yourself.
Yeah, that one is so important. And again, because the words that we say to ourselves matter. We heard it right at the beginning. Every one of us goes through seasons where we are stuck.
Yeah.
And so have the compassion to show to yourself.
Yeah. If you're stuck today, we just want to encourage you. There's a lot that we've shared here. I would say to you, there are people in your life that can be a support. Let your tribe support you. Reach out and get some help. You're never, I know I've said it already, I'm going to say it again, because I know some of you are like I was saying to Jim, I don't believe you. I'm going to say it again. You're never as stuck as you think you are. There is always a way forward.
We want to, again, encourage you to stay connected here with the Living Richly movement, be a part of it. It is an opportunity for you to really connect with others who are working their way out of unstuckness and into that place of being able to live their best life. I want to encourage you, if you haven't already, to like, subscribe, share out the content of this episode and other episodes. And also make sure that you check out our Instagram page. We are really leaning heavily into sharing out 1-minute clips, some of the big takeaways from this episode. You'll find them there. You'll be able to share them out as just quick little tidbits that other people might be able to receive as well.
And make sure to check out our website at livingrichley.me. Every episode has show notes where we point to resources that can be useful to you. We're going to put these questions and principles and strategies that we talked about today. They'll all be posted there for you to read and study after the show is over. And of course, if you're looking for some one-to-one support or group support in your Living Richly journey, we do offer coaching that can be there for you to help you live your best life. So make sure to avail yourself of that as well.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you'll tune in again next week.